Before we get into today's episode, I have to tell you something you've actually been asking for years. One of the most common messages I get is, why don't you have a Mind Love community? Well, I listened, but I wanted to create something that wasn't just another Facebook group. I wanted a space where we could actually grow together with purpose and direction, which is why I created Living Mind Love. Every month, our community is going to explore one powerful focus area together, breaking it down into simple micro practices that actually stick. There's always something new to look forward to, always progress to celebrate, so you'll understand the neuroscience, connect with the spiritual wisdom, and most importantly, have a whole community supporting your growth every step of the way. Honestly, the community alone would be worth it. And I know people are going to join for just that, but we're going so much deeper than that. This is the most value-packed resource for learning and growing together that I've ever seen, let alone created. So you'll be part of the first ever Mind Love community on School, where transformation isn't just possible, it's inevitable. So if you're ready to grow with an amazing group of like-minded souls, go to mindlove.com/living to join the waitlist. And you'll get instant access to my 10-year vision meditation. So let's get into today's episode. Welcome to Mind Love, episode 174. Today's episode is all about assembling your tribe.
I can't show up and be my best self unless I take the time to examine myself. You have to own your own stuff. I tend to try to look at the patterns of how other people show up in my life and how I show up in their lives, because sometimes when we're emotional and we're experiencing pain, we have a tendency to want to, strike out and really feed some of that emotion that we're feeling, when actually if we look at how people have shown up in our lives, sometimes that's where the answer lies.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
Hello, love. First of all, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that little button. Subscribing, sharing, and 5-star reviews are really such a great way to give back if you find this show helpful. It helps the show climb the charts, which helps me get even better guests. Today, I'm going to read a short and sweet review from T. Georgette from Canada, or maybe it's T. George T. Just says, amazing podcast. Thank you. And I'm reading this to show you that leaving a 5-star review doesn't have to be hard. It can be just as short as that, and I love it just as much. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. Did you know that friendships are a major key to happiness? Yep, the longest running study on happiness ever done has been by Harvard. Of course, the study is only of men because that's how science worked back then, but whatever. They followed 268 men and then expanded it to even their children. So the study totaled 1,300 people. Well, the surprising conclusion is that our relationships and how happy we are in our relationships has a powerful influence on our health. That makes total sense. I mean, they say even just having a cat helps people live longer. But I had to find a study that included women, and thankfully, modern science has decided to include us. Finally. So another study on happiness included over 250,000 women, and they found that female friendships can be the key to happiness, especially in older women. Apparently, friends can help each other find the humor in growing older. And isn't that so true? We're all growing older, and with each life change comes a transition, which can sometimes be pretty difficult. Even when you're transitioning into something better or something exciting, there can still be a little bit of mourning for what you're moving on from. For example, I am so excited to have this baby. I'll actually have it, hopefully, by the time you listen to this. But if I'm being honest, I am already mourning parts of my life that I'm leaving behind. It's been hard to plan anything. I usually like to have some sort of travel to look forward to, but that doesn't really seem feasible right now. Even girls' trips. I'm going to have a newborn. It feels kind of far-fetched to have a weekend getaway with my girls anytime in the next year. But I know that my friendships, especially my female friendships, are a big part of my happiness. So I know that I need to prioritize this even if I am going through a transition. So with this transition in mind, I've been making it a priority to assemble my tribe of mommies. I basically have ongoing text threads with my friends that are currently pregnant, my friends that are new moms, and my friends that have been moms for a while. I mean, I need all the support that I can get, so I want my ladies with all the levels of experience. This was actually partially inspired by episode 151 with BJ Fogg about habits, when he's talking about moving through life and finding people that are on the journey with you and already where you want to go, so that you have support from all sides. So for me, doing this with different levels of mamas out there has made a huge difference, even though connecting with them has looked a little different this last year. But I'm guessing that you can relate that the older we get, the more that these relationships take, I guess you can call it management. So instead of just going to a party and seeing everyone you know, you've got to make phone calls and meet one-on-one for coffee or wine night. There have been days where I would do just about anything for those Sex and the City type friendships. 4 besties making brunch a regular thing. But some of my besties don't even know each other, and the ones that do don't necessarily have that kind of free time. Not to mention, with life transitions, it seems like just when I'm starting to get a solid group, someone moves away, or has a baby, me, or the friendship just doesn't work out. After this happens a few times, it can be kind of tempting to stop trying. I mean, these relationships take time and energetic investment, so it sucks to feel like that investment was lost. So how do we find our tribes, especially if we're not in college anymore or going to a workplace? What should we be looking for in a friendship circle? And how do we know if a friendship is worth that investment for us? Well, that's what we're talking about today, and our guest is Leah Dean. She's a leadership coach and author of Assemble the Tribe. She helps women unleash their unique value, redefine their tribes, and reimagine how they show up in the world. 3 key things we will learn are how your self-worth affects your friendships, how to get comfortable having necessary conversations to keep your friendships strong and moving forward, and a unique formula for building your tribe. But before we dive in, I want to invite you to wake up to the Morning Mind Love. This isn't just some boring newsletter. Instead, each weekday morning, you get a little inspiration to just set your tone for the day and give you something positive to focus on. Think of it like a short note sent from your higher self. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of self-reflective journaling prompts to help you grow. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com and sign up. Or if you're out and about, just text the word morning to 33777. That's morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Leah Dean to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So what's your story and what got you focused on tribes specifically?
Oh, wow. That's such a loaded question. When I go all the way back through history, I think that my whole life has been leading me to this journey of tribes. So as a child, I grew up on a remote island in Bermuda, and my parents were, I want to say they were the first tribe builders that I had the pleasure of spending time with. And they had a very open door policy. Anyone was welcome, anyone was able to come into our home and spend time with our family. They really wanted to create a place where people could feel safe and experience belonging. So that's what I observed as a child. And then, as I got older, my career, for a variety of reasons, led me into the field of HR. And in some ways, I see that almost as an extension of what I observed as a child. We need places to connect. We need places to find belonging. And so I spent about 20 years working in HR, all the way up to corporate and board levels. And then more recently, I decided to take a break. And it was really after a very busy career, I decided to take a break to spend some time with my family and write this book that came out of nowhere. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But that is essentially the story of how Assemble the Tribe came to be. I took a break from a 20-year career, wrote a book, and here we are.
It's interesting because my husband and I talk a lot about this because his family was a lot like yours, where the door was just always open. It didn't matter who stayed the night. And looking back on my childhood, it was kind of mixed. My mom would allow me to have friends over. The garage was kind of my place with ping pong and all of that, but I was an only child. And so at the same time, I was so used to being alone and to kind of be responsible for my own play or whatever I was doing. And the older I get, though, it's funny because I went through a whole stage where I'm like, I just prefer going to other people's houses. That way I can leave when I want. There's no awkward moments. And I thought that that made me happy, but I didn't realize that I was just always at other people's places. And now that I'm kind of a homebody, I'm like, maybe there's something to this. Like, I love having people over. I love sharing food. I love just the community of it. And it's something that I've been really seeking the last few years. So I'm curious though, when we're talking about a tribe, is it just a group of friends? Is it just people? Or is there something specific when you say tribe that you mean?
I am so glad you asked. So I promised I would share the quick story of the book. So I never intended to write it. For the last couple of years, I've been producing women and girls events. And so after our second event, we've done a few more, but after our second event, I came home and I hung out with the team. And then at, I want to say 5 a.m. in the morning, I woke up. So literally it was a big event. I went to sleep at about 2 or 3, woke up at 5, and all of a sudden I have this idea for a book. And so I tell people it was divinely inspired because I never intended to write it. But what's really cool about that moment is as I inked the table of contents, I really thought that tribe was about a group. I have a group of friends. We've traveled life for almost 20 years now. And so I really thought if I could just teach women and girls how to have this connection that I've experienced for nearly 20 years, I would have, really given a gift to the world. But what I found in the process of writing the book is that at its highest level, I found out a lot of things. At its highest level, tribe is a way of thinking because you can have one-on-one relationships, you can have groups, but you can still feel lonely. You can still feel isolated, even with people all around you. So that at its highest level, in order to experience true and meaningful relationships, it's all about the mindset we have and how we choose to show up. And that was an aha for me because I thought I was just writing, like, here's my manual for how to create, a girls group. But it was much deeper than that in the end.
So what is the benefit of having these tribes and really what's the consequence if we don't have it, which I think a lot of us might be feeling after this last year?
Yeah, so there are so many benefits to having tribes. I think the biggest benefit that I stumbled across in the research is really the health benefits. You will literally live longer, healthier, happier if you have people in your tribe. And the data would suggest that, you can almost increase your likelihood of death by up to 29% on average if you don't have good quality social relationships. So I think the health benefits of having a tribe are so, so very important. And, as part of my research, I talked to a number of doctors and scientists, and one study in particular, it was around women and breast cancer and the reoccurrence rates and mortality rates for women who had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And they found significant reductions in the women who had strong quality relationships. So, there's so many benefits, but the few that I really highlight in the book is the health benefits, because as you age, those friendships, they become even more important. There are studies that will show that your both familiar, meaning your family, and your friendships are important as you age, but the data suggests that your friendships actually become more important as you age, because sometimes as families, we have to make difficult decisions, and our friendships become these safe havens where we can really kind of exhale from difficult situations we might find ourselves in with our families. So there's so many things that are valuable about tribes, but the health benefits really stood out in my own experience and in the research.
I am curious what makes a healthy tribe. And what brings this up for me is because I think of the only child thing, there's a number of things, but I've always felt like I've wanted to belong. Like I am looking for those friendships where they feel like sisters to me. And, I'd watch Sex and the City or something like that. And I'd just be like, why can't I have friendships like that? And so in college, I actually joined a sorority for a while to get that sense of belonging, that sisterhood. And when I joined, at first it was amazing. It was like rush semester. And so everyone's like really trying to woo you to be in their little family. But then I started to have a lot of questions about the whole thing. Like, just for me, them forcing us to get highlights in our hair and buy designer jeans. And I was the only one of my friends that really still had to have a job in college and things like that. And so I wasn't showing up to the events. And long story short, I ended up feeling very left out of this sisterhood and eventually decided not to be in the sorority anymore. And I think even since then, going into other friendship circles, there have just been times that even when I'm surrounded by people, I still feel like I don't quite belong, or that, one wrong move might get me kicked out or something like that. And so when we're looking at assembling a tribe, how do we avoid that? Or what are we looking for so that we get real sustainable relationships or a support system, rather than just another thing that puts more pressure on us to fit into something that maybe we're not? Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts: a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up, or text the word morning to 33777. Let's talk about legacy for a minute. We're all working so hard on personal growth and building better lives and creating something meaningful. But how do we protect everything we're building? Look, I know life insurance isn't the sexiest topic, but it might be one of the most loving things you can do for your family. We kept putting it off. It's funny how things never feel like a priority until you need it, which is the total wrong way to approach life insurance. But now that we have kids, there is no way I'm taking a chance that they won't be taken care of if something happens to me. So suddenly, this was our number 1 priority. And SelectQuote makes it surprisingly simple. They're one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience helping over 2 million customers. What makes them different is just how personal it is. Their licensed agents take the time to understand your specific situation so that they can find you the right coverage. We're talking 15 minutes to get exactly what you need. And I love that they actually reward you for all the self-work you're doing. So if you're in good health, you could get same-day coverage for up to $5 million. No medical exam needed. And it's way more affordable than you might think. Coverage up to $1 million could cost as little as $20 per month. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/mindlove. Go to selectquote.com/mindlove today to get started. That's selectquote.com/mindlove. What are we looking for so that we get real sustainable relationships or a support system, rather than just another thing that puts more pressure on us to fit into something that maybe we're not?
So let me share it in 2 ways, and if I forget the second, remind me. I want to talk about what I call T, but first I want to share my tribe building formula, which is the process that I suggest in my book for how we build tribes. And it's a very simple formula: believe plus belong equals be different. So if I break that down, in order to have really good, strong quality relationships, we have to believe that we're worth it. And I think every single person has value. And, sometimes our biggest hurdle in experiencing good quality relationships is we are concerned that maybe we're not good enough, or when we walk into the room, what are other people thinking? So one of the reasons why I really love those words, believe and value, is because value is utility, it's worth, it's important. And belief, by definition, is a habit of the mind in which you build trust and confidence in a person or thing. So first step in having good quality relationships is every day you have to get up and you have to have a practice. I know you've interviewed quite a few guests about neuroscience and creating neural pathways. You have to have a practice that says, I'm worth any relationship that I choose to engage in. And then you find these places to belong. And as you just said, you can find places to belong, but you may not necessarily experience intimacy. There's a difference between a place to belong and experiencing belonging. And that belonging is a combination of either a group or two people putting in what I call T, which is time, effort, and emotions, to create relationships that are strong. And, a lot of us as women, we go into friendships and relationships and we want them to be we want them to be havens of comfort. And instead, sometimes we can find friction. And I often say to people, anything worth having takes work. And relationships are no exception. And as women, I don't say this to be condescending, we're complicated, right? And so, Melissa, there is really no short answer to here's how I'm going to guarantee that I have good quality relationships or a strong tribe. It's really about shifting your mindset, believing in your value, finding these places where you can belong, and then showing up in a way that really allows you to connect with others and others to connect with you. And sometimes that means you got to have the difficult conversations. I call them necessary conversations. They're uncomfortable, but you have to have them. And, it requires being open-minded, really putting your own feelings aside, assessing who you are as a person, because sometimes there are things inside each of us that we aren't willing to maybe recognize or don't want to admit. So it's really about doing enough work on I talk about in the book, I call it stuff, understanding your own stuff so that you can take your best self into a relationship. And I know for my friends, because I believe I'm worth it, because I believe I have something to share with them, I'm just a bit more willing to be open now in my relationships and have the necessary conversations to keep our relationships healthy.
Right. And I can even see the evolution of friendships, as we get older. In my early 20s, I was partying all the time. So I was surrounded by people, but none of them were real intimate relationships. It was just like whoever had the open house or the free drugs, and so it's just like, and then now I do have a core group of friends that I can rely on for things, but it did take a lot of evolving. And there was this weird period of time in that transitional period of really understanding myself and kind of knowing who I am at a core level, which I don't think really happened until it started in my late 20s and it really started to blossom in my early 30s. And so not just the relationships evolved, a lot of them fell away, some of them deepened, and really it just drilled down to a much smaller knit group, but at the same time, a much more fulfilling group. But I'm curious, what are some examples of these necessary conversations that might be had? Like, are these conversations that might have kept some of those friendships that have fallen away because don't seem aligned anymore? Are they conversations as we understand our own needs and what we're looking for? Or what are some examples of those?
So there's a chapter that I have in the book called The Dark Side of Tribe, because I find that in my own research, I looked at the top 5 reasons why female groups tend to fall apart. Sometimes it's life stage changes. So you said you have some groups that are falling away just because of the fact that you're in a different stage in life, distance, personalities, disagreements. And so the question becomes, how do you navigate all of those changes in order to keep your relationships healthy? So, for example, you talked about having a sorority and a group of friends in college. and then you all moved in separate directions. In order for you to have maintained any kind of a relationship, you would have had to figure out a way to put in the time, the effort, and the emotion to make it happen. And sometimes we don't necessarily have those conversations. And so the relationship falls away, and then we find ourselves lonely. Sometimes it's necessary for you to move on, but sometimes if you have intentional conversations, you can salvage. I have the other thing that I talked about was distance. So I have another friend who is really near and dear to my heart, and she is thousands and thousands of miles away. We have to be very intentional. We have a date every Friday morning. We talk for an hour, sometimes more, and our relationship has grown even in spite of the distance, which is interesting because we typically tend to think that you have to be in the presence of someone in order to have relationships. But a lot of the necessary conversations that you mentioned, they tend to be around things that, trigger our emotions. So it could be things like differing relationship expectations. I want to spend time with you. You don't have enough capacity to spend time with me. Or maybe there are some folks who just like to talk a little bit too much, or there are differences in our views around how we spend money when we go out to dinner. It could be any number of things that get in the way. And I go through quite a number in the book and give ideas and tips on how to navigate those. But necessary conversations at its core, it's based on the philosophy and neuroscience that when we approach fundamentally needed conversations as difficult, dangerous, or risky, we stimulate that whole flight or fight response, the hormone, which immediately requires us to then shift into having to manage fear. And so necessary conversations basically says that most conversations, they don't have to be difficult or dangerous or risky, but rather if we focus on the love and the connection that we want to have with someone else, they just become necessary. So, when I think about, I'll tell you a funny example. So my husband, we're working from home now, and he has this horrible habit of leaving the Keurig cup in the machine. And so I'll go to make my tea and I have coffee ground. Anyway, I could very, very easily just have a really difficult conversation where I'm attacking him because he forgets it all the time and I've asked him, or I could just assume that he's not doing it to hurt me. And I could say, hey, could you try to remember such and such, because it would be really helpful. I mean, it's a really small example, but the idea of necessary conversations is that because you love someone, you choose or you care about them, you choose different words in order to navigate the situation because you really just want to enjoy your time with them. And the two of us are stuck in this house with COVID. And so I'd like to have it as pleasant as possible. And we can take that same approach in our relationships. Instead of attacking, it's what language can I use just to keep the relationship healthy? And that can immediately kind of switch a gear in your brain.
Where is the balance between having these necessary conversations and also maybe practicing acceptance, which is something I've tried to bring into a lot of my relationships? Whereas, I do know one of my best friends doesn't have a lot of time to hang out, and we bonded on that actually in our 20s, where we were like, we're the types of friends that we can do our own thing. We are both scattered and all over the place. We can come back together after 3 years and it's like no time has passed. Well, over time, I've kind of changed and I'm like, I want a schedule and reliability. And so for me, I'm like, but I know that that's how she is, so I don't take it personally. And so sometimes I look at my friendships and I'm just like, well, okay, this is the person to go to for that deep conversation. This is the person I go to when I'm venting. This is the person I go to when I want to splurge at dinner or whatever. And so how much of these conversations are we maybe unintentionally trying to mold them to what we want versus trying to just accept it and be grateful for what it is, if that makes sense?
No, it absolutely makes sense. And I would maybe frame it slightly differently. I would say we need multiple tribes to complete our sense of wholeness and fulfill some of the needs that we have. And so I love what you just said in terms of just recognizing that I can have this person who fills this need, and then I can have another group over here. And that's really this idea at the end of my formula. I didn't finish it. There's believe, there's belong, there's be different. The be different part of the formula is what that really means is that if I believe that I have value and I've found places to belong, then I can leverage that belief and belonging to show up differently. And that means more open, more patient, more accepting, and really just moving my mindset to a place that allows me to meet people where they are. And, there's a story that I tell about that 20-year tribe that I've had for a very long time. And I remember, I can't remember, it was maybe about year 10 or 15, I started to feel lonely. I couldn't figure out, why am I lonely? We have such a deep friendship and a great level of trust. Why am I feeling lonely? And what I realized is that my career was at an inflection point where I needed some additional support. I needed additional insight that I couldn't necessarily get from that particular tribe. And so I think if there was anything that I want your listeners to take away, it's that it's okay and it's absolutely necessary to have different tribes at different times in our lives, and that's okay.
Even with my relationship with my husband, I've had these thoughts before where it's funny because we expect like these people to be everything to us, to like fulfill these needs, when so many of the needs maybe could be fulfilled by another person, by ourselves, by, just finding something that makes you happy. And so I realized that when I want to like vent about something, it's best to go to one of my girlfriends, because his feedback just is not, it's not the kind that I need to hear. I need him to like indulge with me.
I'm laughing because like in the first maybe year or two of my marriage, my husband said to me, "I love you, but I am not your girlfriend." So if you had, think they say women have like 50,000 words a day. He said, "I can take about 10,000 of them. The other 40, you need to go find your girlfriend." So anyway, that's
right.
funny.
And now it's funny because sometimes he'll just say, "What do you need from me right now?" Or I'll come in and I'll be like, I'll see his mind turning and I'll say, "All I need from you right now is to agree with me." And he's like, "Okay." But it's interesting though, because
Just listen today. Just listen.
Because a lot of that, though, when I realize like I'm not feeling fulfilled, my natural instinct is to be like, why can't you just give me this? And as I'm evolving and as I'm growing and learning about myself and self-development in general, less and less do I expect somebody else to fulfill me. And this is a fine line, because I think connection and relationships in general are one of my personal needs. But it's a difference between knowing I need to connect and I need to feel that I am loved and to have deep relationships, versus I need these relationships to do this specific thing for me, or you need to act in a certain way so that I feel this fulfillment. And so as you're talking about how different tribes might fulfill different things for you, I'm curious about your process of self-reflection in order to figure that out, because I think our natural instincts are often like, "Oh, this friend is doing this now," and we place the blame too easily, whereas it does often require that like stillness, that thinking like, okay, well, what do I feel like I'm missing? And you gave the example of, why am I feeling lonely still? It must be this other thing. Do you journal about that? Do you spend a lot of time reflecting on your relationships to see what is still needed and where you can get that? Or what's your process for that?
I don't know why it took me so long to invest in good bedding. I resisted it for years, but something flipped in me about 3 years ago. And now I'm basically a pillow connoisseur. I've tried them all, and I get weirdly excited about good bedding. Because here's the thing, we spend a third of our lives in bed, and the quality of that time affects literally everything else, which is why I'm so excited to tell you about my latest obsession, Lagoon Sleep Pillows. What sets them apart is their matching system. You take a quick 2-minute quiz about your sleep style and your preferences, and then they match you with your perfect pillow. I was matched with their Otter pillow, and I am so impressed. Lately, I've just needed more support, and this seems to cradle me in all the right places. I'm also low-key obsessed with their travel pillow, which I use for way more than just travel. I actually hug it, use it as leg support, and of course, take it on trips with me. Well, the secret is in their adjustable fill. You can add or remove it to get that perfect alignment for your spine. A study even found that the right supportive pillow can improve sleep quality by 63%. And Lagoon lets you try their matched pillow for 100 nights risk-free. Free returns, no questions asked. Falling asleep has never been easier. I toss and turn less and just wake up feeling refreshed every morning. Go to lagoonsleep.com and take their awesome 2-minute sleep quiz to find your match. Use the code MIND for 15% off your first purchase.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Do you spend a lot of time reflecting on your relationships to see what is still needed and where you can get that? Or what's your process for that?
I by nature tend to be a very reflective person. And again, I truly believe the formula that I shared with you. I can't show up and be my best self unless I take the time to examine myself. And so that's really one of the fundamental things that I talk about and share in the book, right? You have to own your own stuff. Who are you? What are the good parts about you? What is your personality like? What are your strengths? How do you think? Are you being flexible? And so I really try to take a step back and do some self-reflection and think about how I show up in my relationships. The other thing that, has been really helpful for me is I tend to try to look at the patterns of how other people show up in my life and how I show up in their lives. Because sometimes when we're emotional and we're experiencing pain, we have a tendency to want to, strike out and really feed some of that emotion that we're feeling. When actually, if we look at how people have shown up in our lives, sometimes that's where the answer lies. I have one situation that I can think of where I was having a difficult time with a friend, and I was really starting to think about, well, is it me or is it time to move on? And as I went back and I looked at the pattern of how we had both shown up in each other's lives, I realized that we were having inflection points for different reasons. And that once we had a necessary conversation around that, we were able to salvage the friendship, and we are actually stronger now than we were before. And so just to go back to your original question, I tend to, once a year whether it's during my planning or goal setting process, I really do spend some time thinking about who am I and what do I have to give. That's where our relationships start to shift. It's not always about what can I take from my friends, but what am I giving as well? And if I'm not giving my best self, then there's work that I need to do at home, so to speak.
That's so true. And I have often evaluated my relationships by looking at, well, okay, after I'm done hanging out with them or spending time with them, do I feel energized or drained? And it sounds so simple, but it would be a very clear distinction with certain friends. And I could tell, I'm really trying to hold on to this because maybe it's been a long friendship, but I've been drained the last 2 years of hanging out with this person,
Sometimes that's a necessary conversation that we can have. So I have a friend, going on 20 years now, and we feel safe with each other. And so the things like our most difficult moments, the frustrations that we have, it's very easy to share. And the conversation that we've been having of late, that I've been triggering in our interactions is, do we have to talk about all of the things that are hard for us? Or can we maybe talk about some of our dreams? And really making the effort to pull the conversation back from those dark places. Sometimes it's not always sinister. The person is draining you because they feel safe, or they're draining you because they're experiencing a lot of friction. And it's not to say that we shouldn't acknowledge the challenges that we have in the lives of our friends, but also making sure that we're being balanced. So we talked about, what can we do to make sure that we have fun in addition to this being a safe place for us to connect?
That is such a good point because I think a lot of people just don't have the awareness that that might be the energy that they're contributing. And especially if it's a pattern in a relationship that is a long-standing one. Whereas I wasn't thinking about, am I drained or energized when I was 21? I was thinking about, where the next party was. And so I love that point. And it kind of brings me to the idea of even in the last few years, I've started to look less on what are my relationships doing to my energy level and more so what energy am I contributing, which is something that you've mentioned. Like, what am I bringing to this? A relationship takes work. And if we're going into our friendships and our tribe thinking, okay, well, I need a tribe because this is what it's going to feed me, but not like, how am I going to contribute? How am I going to give an equal amount? And so it is really important to ask yourself, like, am I contributing to this energy as well? Am I bringing down their energy? And just that simple awareness might change the way that we show up in those relationships.
Yeah, I think it's really important to always examine how we're showing up. And relationships are, there's a motto I have in the book for how to think about building your tribe. And so one of the things that I talk about, and this is for new relationships, but sometimes we can use it to analyze the existing relationship. So why do I have this relationship? What is it doing for me? What am I contributing to it? How often do we want to interact? Who's going to take the responsibility to make sure to keep us connected? That's the second step. The first one is D, which is dare, define the relationship. 2, activate to stay connected. 3, somebody got to reach out and invite people in a group setting. And then the last step, which is really speaks to what we're talking about now, which is examine individual motivations. Sometimes we have to assess, why do I want this relationship? What am I going to bring to it? What is going to happen as a result of this friendship? And I'm not saying that, you have to get out a large book and write notes and analyze like you would at work, but it's worth it every now and again just to say, who am I? What do I have to give? And what can we create together? It's just worth it to take the time to do it.
I can see that. So I recently moved to a new town. I just needed to get out of the city during all the chaos of COVID and the lockdowns. And so I wanted to get into nature. So I have moved a lot by myself. And so I am very bold when it comes to just like meeting new people and saying, let's be friends. Hey, you want to be besties? It's ridiculous. And so there's a Facebook group for this town. It's a small town. And I just posted on there. I'm like, hey, I'm new to the area. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm pregnant right now. I need friends. Who else needs friends? And met up with a few different people for coffee and such. And what I realized is, okay, it's been kind of a while since I've had to do this because I've been in LA where I knew a lot of people and there were just always events going on where I could easily meet people. And when I was younger, it was very easy to be like, oh, well, what are you doing tonight? Not many people at that age had these anchors in their life that they were like tied down to. Well, I've got to be home for dinner by 5:30. And so I was sitting there like meeting people for coffee and I'm like, wait, so I thought this was where the work started, but the work actually starts now. Like, do we get together again? Do I invite them over for dinner? And it just becomes like this chore. And so when you're assessing those things, is this something that you're like public about where you're like, hey, okay, if we're going to be friends, we got to figure out who's going to call each other next? Or like, how do you go about that assessment process?
I'm glad you mentioned it. For my one-on-one relationships, I tend to tick through those kind of mentally. I had a friend reach out to me a couple months ago, and we had a mutual friend who put us together, and I left the lunch thinking, what am I going to do with this relationship? And I didn't really know. So I spent some time thinking about it and I chose to give it some time to evolve. I find that dare process works really, really well though when you're putting together a group because you have so many different personalities that are coming into play and really making sure that the group and the members of the group get what they need from the interaction. Sometimes it could be a really quick conversation, and sometimes if you're the one organizing it just might be a checkbox that you work through in your head. You kind of have to figure out how to what will work for you, but it's at least a good thing to consider. Because I find more often than not, I think of one group that I'm part of, one person wanted something dramatically different from the rest of the group, and they ended up leaving, and it was difficult and it was painful and hurtful. Whereas if we would have had some of these conversations, hey, this is why we come together, this is why we assembled, at least this is what we need right now, right? Because as you grow, your needs change, and that's natural. But sometimes when we don't have those conversations, those are the reasons why the group splinter and the relationships break.
Well, that brings up a point that you kind of mentioned earlier about how, women are complicated. And I don't take that as an offense. I take that as a compliment. I would prefer to be complicated than simple. But you talking about how women with, all their depth, I'll call it, coming together and just different ways of handling things, more emotions, those types of things. I know that you talk about kind of the dark side of tribe building. What are some of these challenges that women in particularly face, and how do we navigate them when we are trying to build this close knit tribe?
There are so many. In the book, there are a few that I talk about that I'll mention now. One is a big one. It's navigating hormones. I think you just mentioned that you're having a baby, right?
Yeah. I literally said like 15 minutes ago, 15 minutes before this started, I'm just like, I am obviously hormonal today.
So listen, when you get in that state, when women in general get in that state, and I have a 13-year-old daughter who's, in the early stages of puberty, there are days when we do things that we just don't intend to do. Today, I wanted to get up and eat whole foods all day, but maybe I ate chocolate, right? There are just things that we do that do not make sense. And sometimes when we're navigating our relationships, our hormones can get in the way. And it really was difficult for me to write that one down, but it is a reality. And so some days we just need people to extend grace. I'm having a moment. And I need you to give me some space to work that through. But instead, we tend to lash out, and then we, aren't quick to apologize. So that's one of the other things. We know we've messed up, but maybe time gets in the way, or we get busy and we don't reach out to say, hey, this happened. I messed up. I'm sorry. That's really not what I meant to do. So those are two. Sometimes we sweat the small stuff. The other thing that comes up in the dark side is kind of identifying what I call negotiable and non-negotiable values. So we're often looking for people who, want similar things and care about similar things. But if I put two folks who loved a lot of the same things in the same room and started to ask them to really pull apart their values, they would be different, because our values are unique to us as individuals. But sometimes it can get a little bit tricky, because maybe I have a value of work hard or work first and then play, and you have more of a relaxed, I'll play all through my work mentality. And sometimes that can create friction, right? And so in that situation, I have to decide that we don't necessarily have to work together the way that I like to work together. I'll just be more flexible, right? So, but if I'm not willing to negotiate around that value, you can see very quickly how sometimes those relationships and friendships could come to a grinding halt. So those are just a few, and I talk about them extensively in the book and provide a few tips on how to navigate them. But there are so many things for us as women that get in the way. We just talked about some of the more relational things, but then there's society as well, right? There's stereotypes and expectations that are placed on us, and expectations that we have of each other. And so one of the messages that I hope filters through is we are complicated. That's okay. And the same amount of grace that I want somebody to extend to me, I need to extend to you, Melissa, when you show up one day and you're not your best self. One of my mentors, her advice is always assume good intent. And I think as women, if we can start there and assume good intent and have the necessary conversations to keep our relationships healthy, we'll be a lot happier.
Yeah. And what I am coming to understand, the more I dive into my own growth journey, is it just seems to me that most things, whether it's about finding tribes, finding purpose, finding love, the first step is really understanding yourself more or becoming aware of your own patterns and your own habits and your own needs. And so what I find is that the more close friendships that I have, even when they are a little bit complicated, even when they do kind of shine a light on my shadow side, they're doing exactly that. They're showing me the spots that I still need to grow, how I can better communicate, how I can better navigate relationships with other people, which is really necessary for a fulfilling life. So when we're learning all of this about ourselves and kind of using these people as other people as reflections for who we are, it can give us a lot of insight into what our own superpowers are, what value we do bring, whether that's to friendship or to the universe as a whole. And so I know that you talk about tribes and purpose, but what are your thoughts on what tribes have to do with purpose?
So purpose for me, I mean, there's all kinds of courses that you can take on how to find it. But if you just read the definition of purpose, purpose is the reason why you exist. And so therefore, if purpose is the reason why something exists, then it's not something that we have to search for. It's something that's inside us. And you're right. You could say, well, what does my tribe have to do with my purpose? Well, I can tell you in my own experience, when I figured out that I am good at building tribes and bringing people together, to experience amazing things, I tapped into my tribe and said, hey guys, here's what I think I can do. Can you help me pull it off? And so not only did they support me and tell me, absolutely, you can do that. They showed up, they helped, they gave me feedback, they gave me suggestions. They dried my tears when I had a good cry because something broke. Our tribes can, in some ways, have this cementing effect on our gifts and our talents and our purpose. And so that's the way I think about it. My purpose is innately who I am. It's the best parts of me. And when I find the right people and I do the work to keep my relationships healthy, they can help support me with my dreams. Like, I'm sure that you probably have some really good friends when you got ready to launch a podcast where every now and again you might have needed somebody to call you up and say, hey, Melissa, you're doing a really great job. And, the process of writing a book can be isolating and lonely. And some days I would have somebody call me and say, hey, when are you finishing that book? Because I need it. Here's what I'm going through. And that's the way that good, healthy tribes help us to realize our purpose and find our dreams.
So given that, where are some places that you recommend people find belonging in this kind of new environment that we're living in?
So I think, and I'll just use my own experience, I think the first thing that we can always do is to take a step back and take an inventory of the relationships that we already have, because some of those people might need us in ways that we maybe hadn't thought about before. And so who's in your existing tribe? Who haven't you talked to? Who haven't you had a real conversation with? Yeah, you DM'd and traded some messages, but who might benefit from some deeper time? Maybe turn off social a little bit and have those conversations. So that's the first place I would start. If you're looking for something new or something different, there are so many people that have moved online in terms of events and networking groups. There's, I don't know if you've heard about it, but there's Clubhouse where you can, go in and have live conversations with strangers. There's so many places online where you can meet new people. But I would say though, and this is just my personal bias, typically we have people in our lives, from our family, because our family is our most essential tribe, to our friends that maybe we can invest more. And I'd specifically highlight our seniors and our young people. If you look at the data around what social isolation and loneliness and the impact that it has on those two populations, there are so many people out there who need us. And so I just suggest people start there. I think the pandemic has created an incredible opportunity for us to take a step back, slow down, and think about our relationships with our family, our friends, and the people that we care about and the people who need us in our community. And so I would encourage people to continue to do that, because as we stay stuck inside, I think we'll need each other even more.
Right. And for my own personal tip, what's been really working for me is that, it's so easy to get caught up in the, well, I need this, or people aren't reaching out to me, or there's nothing to do and I'm lonely, and kind of expecting other people to take that first move, or even kind of half-assing it by like putting out a little, hey, you want to hang out? And then getting back a rejection and being like, see, this confirms everything I believe about myself. And so what I've been trying to do is really just give to people, whether that's connection, whether it's, I've been sending a lot of people chocolate strawberries for some reason, and just trying to like just put positive energy out there and expect nothing in return. And even when there's nothing that comes back to me, that just the very act of giving, I feel connected to people. And I think those things, even if there's not an immediate reaction of like, okay, well, now I'm going to send you something, which is not what I'm looking for. People think about you in a different way. Like, oh, wow, maybe this is a deeper friendship than I thought, or maybe it just lit up their day a little bit. But I believe that energy will always come back to you.
I love that you said that. It's almost like create what you want to experience. One of the things that I did, which was really fun, I missed my girlfriends when we were in quarantine back in March of 2020, and we were all home stuck inside. And so I created an event, which I call Assemble the Tribe for Tea. And I've had as many as 75 women on a call on a Thursday night with their teacups, just hanging out, talking about the one question that we decided we wanted to talk about that night. And so if you don't see it, sometimes you can create it. So I love what you just shared. And I think if we can invest in the relationships that we do have with, and I might want something different to let me go out and create it and give, then that's a really beautiful place to be.
I love that. And yeah, I have been doing inner circle calls, as I call them, for my inner circle members, just because I think we've needed that extra connection and coming together, talking about things that might not be just what's on the news, which seems to dominate every conversation these days, has been so fulfilling. So thank you so much for everything that you've shared today and for bringing together this information, because I think it's so needed right now. So for listeners that are interested in learning more about you and your book, where's the best place for them to connect with you online?
So please head over to my website, which is www.assemblethetribe.com. That's actually the book page, which will take you deeper into my website. But from the book page, you can find the link to buy the book on Amazon. You can also download a free copy of the intro and first chapter. And then I also have a free tribe health assessment. So if you want to kind of figure out where am I on this whole believe, belong, be different journey, you can take my tribe assessment for free. So come hang out. And then on social media, I am at Leah Dean on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, anywhere you want to hang out. I'm happy to connect with you.
All of the links from this episode will be at mindlove.com/174. So this week, your challenge is to assemble your tribe, or at least reconnect with some people that are already in your tribe. I know this last year has been so weird for a lot of us, so maybe getting together with friends is looking different, maybe not, depends what side of that coin you're on. But there are always people that we can choose to deepen a connection with. So it's interesting, I have found that through the last year, I've actually reconnected with a lot of people that have been on my list because social gatherings weren't immediately front of mind, so connection had to be intentional anyways. So I actually met up with several friends from high school that I haven't seen in almost 20 years and had coffee with them. And it was amazing. It was really cool to be able to connect with people again. So sometimes, especially when we're feeling lonely, we get caught up in this mindset of connection lack. Like with anything, we start to focus on how we don't have this thing in our life, and that just grows and grows and grows. So I recommend that you first start with the people you do have in your life. even if it's been 20 years since you've spoken to them, but maybe you're friends on Facebook. So just reach out, have a conversation, ask how these people are doing, maybe connect on Zoom, maybe get a little vulnerable and post something and see who reaches out. There are so many ways to do this, but the more that we prioritize those relationships, the harder it is to not notice all of the abundance that we have, regardless of what else is going on in our lives. If this episode was helpful for you, or you want to share it with somebody, maybe as a little reason to connect, just tap the little share button or take a screenshot and post it on social media, tag MindLoveMelissa. Other ways that you can support the show is leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That really helps the growth of the show. You can also get twice as many Mind Love episodes, plus monthly meditations and other bonuses at mindlove.com/premium. And finally, if you haven't signed up for the Morning Mind Love, give it a go. There's absolutely no risk. So many people love it. I get responses from it every single day saying it was exactly what they needed to hear. So sign up at mindlove.com or text the word morning to 33777. And as always, thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.